Good evening. Hello. Good morning, wherever you're watching. Got a little bit of a live for you tonight. Got some news, got some interviews, some Rings of Power interviews, talking a little bit about creators, their approach, their thoughts, right, of specifically the hate that the show has received online and from Lord of the Rings Tolkien's fans. All right. It's going to be getting into that. Also, going to be looking at some Acolyte news. It's come up again. The Acolyte has come up again. And so, Jodie Turner Smith, the woman who played Mother Anastasia from the show, is upset at Disney. She's upset at Disney and she's laying it all out there so that everybody knows. Everybody knows her stance. Everyone knows her opinion. And I'll give you a heads up. It's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of nuts. But I am going to start tonight with the Rings of Power. All right. So if you guys don't know the Nerd of the Rings YouTube channel, it's a pretty big one. Talks a lot about the lore, talks a lot about stories, breaks down a lot of Lord of the Rings stuff, Rings of Power stuff. And specifically books, the books content. And he did an interview a few days ago with the creators, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay of The Rings of Power, both season 1 and season 2. And they had a lot to say. Specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about different spots in this. I don't want to just play the whole thing, but I am going to react to some of it. And there was, towards the end of the interview, there was an interesting point where they kind of talk about how they feel about all of the hate that they have received through the show, right? And so I have a lot of thoughts with this. So I'm going to be going through it, giving my commentary throughout. So let's just go ahead and jump into this, and we'll take it piece by piece. All right.
Kind of going external from the show a little bit here. We kind of live in a time where, I feel like people are constantly being pushed toward binary arguments on just about everything. And I'm curious, as showrunners of a show that's got huge viewership of fans, but JD, I know, this quote was out there a little bit ago. There's also a good number of trolls and stuff.
Which, by the way, good ups on Matt for just bringing this up during an interview, because a lot of people just don't touch it because they realize how much hate the show has, how much people are upset with both season 1 and season 2 of this show. And so it's a good look, I think, even bring it up, because the few times they have brought it up, they kind of just shrug it off. Like he said, trolls, right?
So how do you separate out, as you look at the criticism around your show, what's good faith criticism and what's not? Or do you guys just kind of tune out everything and plug away on the story and just kind of try to block out all the noise?
We yearn for good faith criticism. It's so important. It's vital. And so, I think you can often tell pretty quickly when you start reading something, if it's someone who's genuinely engaging in good faith with the material that's there, and, has things that work for them, things that didn't work for them, things they want to be better. Sometimes people just come with an axe to grind. And when they start hurling invectives and, being insulting and demeaning to either our collaborators or to the process we've gone through, or any of those things, that just becomes sort of like spiritually and creatively corrosive. And
it's interesting that he brings in the process they've gone through. Look, what he's saying sounds nice. What he's saying sounds nice. The thing is, I don't think it's genuine. And even if it comes from a genuine place, I don't believe them. I don't think that they really take any of what fans care about, the actual history of Middle-earth, what's been written by first J.R.R. Tolkien and then his son Christopher Tolkien, who expanded so far into the lore and the history of this world that I don't think they really care. I think what they said, good faith criticism, And then what is kind of just, I guess you might say, just criticism and divisive and mean in some fashion. I don't think they have like a really good line on how to define that. It's a really good thing to say, but I don't think it's true. I don't think there's actually a way they would define it, because there's been people presenting good faith criticism before season 1 came out, when just the trailer was there. And there has been people who all along the way have been presenting, hey, this is making me upset. You should be doing this. They did a whole season 2, and it felt like they didn't listen to a single thing, a single piece of criticism that was said in season 1 by the fans or by people, the conversation online.
And it's not actually going to help. It doesn't help anyone become a better boxer to practice getting sledgehammers like hitting their face. But it does help to have a good sparring partner. And so if you can tell that someone is coming with to come to the gym with you and spar with you, then great, game on. Like,
that's the whole conversation online. Look, if you want to ignore, like, if you want to say it's mean, and I want to ignore all of like the issues where people are like, oh, this is just, it's so stupid that there's like other races or something in it. It's whatever. All right. Now, like a factual criticism is like, women dwarves should have beards. Okay. That's a small one. You can take that into consideration. It seems like they kind of did, because they gave them a little bit of sideburns in season 2. But I don't think that the idea of, a sledgehammer or a sparring partner is well defined. It's just something that is said, because it's like, if you could just watch people's reviews online, and even if they make fun of your show, there's still valid criticism in there, right? Some of it is a little mean and harsh, but it's well deserved.
We'll take those, we'll listen to them, and take it all in good faith.
But a lot of it, I have to say, at the end of the day, we just got to tune it out, because here's the thing. I say
that's the real answer. They just tune it out. And I actually have a theory. I think there's a lot more people than just these two tied to that. They're like the face, they're the creators. I think they've been given so many directives by what they have to include in the show, that they in some ways have their hands tied. I think that I don't think both of them, but I think at least one of them has a really vast knowledge of Middle Earth that was not utilized in the slightest with this show. I feel like everything that's kind of Tolkienism, as they like to always say, Tolkienism or whatever, I think it's not really. It's just alluding to the Peter Jackson movies. It's not actually alluding to the books, right? Or actually building on the Second Age events, because they fundamentally changed everything. You go to like the character the show is built around, Galadriel, and I covered this a few weeks back. They started in a disingenuous place, because they said our first thoughts, like one of the first things that they wanted to do was to make Galadriel, but not like the Lady Galadriel, but make her a general and put a sword in her hand and have her fighting orcs. Like, that was one of their first decisions, and they should have known that that's like so incorrect and not even slightly in the same ballpark as Galadriel during the Second Age in the books. Like, that shouldn't have even been a conversation. So their creative process is not really a process. And it seems like if you have criticism of it, they don't really take it into consideration, even if they say they do. I think the sparring partners that they might say they have are probably internal and probably are not very knowledgeable about the history of Middle Earth. I think they think this canon, this legendarium, is essentially people that were working on the show. I think it's just open to create whatever they want, right? They have characters that are just being able to be moved around like chess pieces on the Middle Earth map, and change the events, change the timeline of everything, compress the timeline, and fundamentally make everything feel shallow.
say this, and I don't know if people believe it when we say this, but like, we are our own harshest critics. There's nothing anyone can say about the show that one of us hasn't already said, oh, this didn't turn out, oh, that was supposed to be better, oh, that didn't work, you know.
I would say I would hope that they really wanted this show to feel big and like in scope and to feel like Middle Earth. And both seasons have just felt so tight and claustrophobic. Like they have these big sweeping drone shots, but they're just like animated like landscape shots, right? And then the like in Numenor, right? There's these big, beautiful, completely probably CGI shots of the city, like sweeping shots. And then we go to like a little corner of a town, like inside the city, and it just feels like a stage set with like 8 people around. It's just so everything that even Eregion, like how much of Eregion did we see? We saw like the courtyard that had like 12 people in it, 12 elves. And then during the battle, it was like the orcs, there was hordes and hordes of orcs. And inside Eregion, it felt like there was like 12, like probably 15 women trying to escape the city. And like, I don't know, maybe 16 soldiers. Like that city felt small and unoccupied. And I think maybe that's one thing that like in production they're like, "Oh, I thought this would look epic, but it just kind of feels empty." That's probably a factor. I would really hope that they felt that way watching it, because that makes the most sense. Joshua's in the chat. Nerd, bro, get off the live and stop calling me a nerd in the live stream. All right.
And yeah, to the point, we actually made a pact with each other as season 1 came out that we would not hurl reviews at each other to back up points that one of us would have made during the development.
but we.
So basically, like during production, they weren't allowed to bring up past arguments about what they wanted to do differently. Okay, whatever, that's fine.
To get better every season, every episode, every hour, and you know, at the end of the day, no one's going to be a harsher critic than we are on it. We want it to be the greatest thing ever, and it's never going to be. So there's always going to be something we could have done better, and we're always going to lay it all on the field.
Well, okay, that's valid. All right, it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be what it is supposed to be, right? Like in the books, it's never going to reach that height. So I don't know. That makes me think of this. Okay, so let's just say there's a line. All right, let me do it here. Let's just say there's a line, and this is like the peak. Okay, this is the peak that you can hit for Legendarium, and it's like the books. Okay, it's the original works of Tolkien and his son Christopher, written in the books. All right, and then let's just say at best the Jackson trilogy lines up somewhere here, okay? The Jackson trilogy doesn't even hit the books. Rightly so. There's a lot of pieces missing, and cinematically you can't grasp the scope of it, all right? So I would be happy if they were at least aiming for the books, they would land somewhere, you know, somewhere closer to the top. But I feel like they just wanted to write their own story, and they just end up like way down here. Like there's nothing, you're not even close to the Jackson trilogy. I felt like they were aiming for the Jackson trilogy, and they fell super short of that. So if you're talking about middle age, the second age, you're supposed to be shooting for the books. That's the source material. Shoot for the events of the second age. But they didn't do that. They just created their own story, wanted to be like the Jackson trilogy. That's why there's so many member berries and callbacks, not to the books, but to the Peter Jackson trilogy in this show. And there's hardly any recognizable moments from the books or from the history of the second age. Like the characters they don't look the way they're described in the book. They don't act the way they're described in the book. The timeline of events are not what the book has. The characters are not they don't even have a complete family. Like Galadriel's supposed to have a husband and a child during the second age of Middle Earth. And so maybe they're going to bring Celeborn into it later. And maybe they're going to introduce like her having a kid or something. But at this point, when the Rings of Power were created, she's supposed to have like a fairly old daughter. Like I don't see the point in changing that history. You can tell a story based on that. There's this idea that so many people have that in order to do an adaptation of a book, you can't do everything right, but you can do a lot right. Like Peter Jackson's trilogy did a lot right. It didn't quite hit the height of the books. I don't think that's possible. I agree with him there, but it can do a lot to remain respectful of the source material and to actually do justice and attempt to put it on screen. But that's not what we got. That's not what we got at all. Let's see if they say anything else, and then I might skip around. Oh, dang it. I gotta add. Unfortunately, I don't pay for YouTube Prime. But yeah,
Hourly Amazon employee.
It's frustrating because I feel like they're not being genuine. I really do feel like they're not being genuine. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, especially in the internet space. When we're taking time to review, when we're taking time to watch all of these episodes, we expect there to be a respect. We expect there to be respect of the time invested. All right. And there was this one article I actually was looking at where it talked about how the week after the finale that they're already, there's a show on Amazon Prime that's already doing a lot better numbers than it dethroned the #1 spot of Rings of Power just a week after the finale. And it was interesting that in the article, they said that season 3 will most likely be greenlit here in the next couple weeks, and confirmed that it's happening. And it brought up, because there's like 150 million supposed people watching the show. And it said in the article, it used a phrase like, even thanks to the people who are hate watching, that are watching the show just to criticize it, that they're also, a part of the continuation of the show. That's some truth to that. But at the same time, it's like, we're waiting for the show to actually reflect the books. We're waiting for them to like change course and do something correct here. All right, let's see. I wanted to go to the very beginning because when they talked about kind of their introduction to the Lord of the Rings story, or the Tolkien books, they had some thoughts that kind of was interesting to me. Let's see.
Showrunners of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. JD, Patrick, thanks so much for taking some time out and start folks off. First question here on the channel. How were you first introduced to Tolkien?
Patrick, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think it was actually the Rankin Bass Hobbit. I think I saw it when I was really
same, actually.
young, made a huge impression, and I read the book like in short order, and fell for it, and then moved on to Fellowship and Towers, after that, when I was probably 12, 13, somewhere in there. So when the Peter Jackson films were, in the hopper, I was the guy like looking forward to it. Like, I wonder what Tom Bombadil will look like. I'm still wondering.
That's annoying. Like, why you gotta, again, this obsession with trying to be like or compete with the Jackson trilogy. They think they're so much better than Peter Jackson and all the people who made those movies, who are loved. Like, people love those movies very dearly, and they want so badly to compete with it. They're literally pulling it down to try to be like, we're better than you because we introduced Tom Bombadil. Well, I got news for you. A lot of people weren't like thrilled to see your version of Tom Bombadil in the story.
No. But no, so I was a book first guy from when I was probably, 8, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. Yeah.
And I came to the party a little later in life, seeing the Jackson films. I've been a big fantasy fan, but I was more on the C.S. Lewis side of the ledger than.
That's interesting. I guess he's a Narnia fan. I'm glad. I really hope they don't pull it. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Netflix is already going to do such a bad job with Narnia. I don't think it could make it worse by pulling, JD into this.
fan. I mean, I grew up with all those books, reading them, but then so saw the Jackson films, then obviously fell in love with Middle Earth, did the deep dive, then read the books, read the Silmarillion, learned Elvish, all of the above, and never looked back.
Very cool. Now, take us back. I've got a lot of questions here, so
I can't say, look, everyone's introduction to the story, I hope it's genuine. I hope it's not something that they're just like, I really want to create something big. And Jackson trilogy was like the biggest cinematic thing since Star Wars. And they just wanted to be a part of it. I hope that's like actually genuine. I kind of get the vibe that I believe the guy with glasses is JD Payne. I really hope it's genuine, that he's like has a real genuine interest in it. And I based on like what I've heard in interviews, he's referenced a lot of things. So I hope it's genuine. But at the same time, it kind of feels like when you see the show, you're like, I don't see how anybody on earth who likes Tolkien would make the show. It seems like people who don't like Tolkien would make this show, because there's so much of the fundamentals about the story that are just completely disregarded.
We're gonna try to get through them all in the time we've got. Take us back to when you were first coming up for the pitch for Rings of Power. What is it about the Second Age story that kind of drew you in and led you to focus on this particular story?
It's a tragedy. It's a tragedy. It's a different kind of story. It's a different story than Lord of the Rings, but it couldn't be more Tolkienian. And it happens to have some of our favorite characters from the Third Age. So those two things put together, and the idea that it was, I mean, again, as I say, it's a tragedy.
They say they're their favorite characters, but they didn't do justice by these characters.
It was a different kind of journey, and would potentially be a complementary journey, not one that was competing. At least that's what we thought at the time.
But also, I mean, you start the Jackson films, and those first 5 minutes are so.
What did he say?
And would potentially be a complementary journey, not one that was competing. At least that's what we thought. Journey, and would potentially be. I mean, again, as I say, it's a tragedy. It was a different kind of journey, and would potentially be a complementary journey, not one that was competing. At least that's what we thought at the time.
So he actually, I think he's alluding to the Jackson trilogy, and so he actually does. He says the original intent was to be complementary, but he didn't. That's what they believed at the time. Instead of competing, it's so clearly that they are competing with the Jackson trilogy, but nobody's like in their minds saying this is as good as that. Like nobody's saying this show is as good as the Jackson trilogy. So it's like all inside the studio, I feel like.
But also, I mean, you start the Jackson films, and those first 5 minutes are so tantalizing. It began with the 4 great rings, and 3 were made for the elves, and 7 for the dwarves, and 9 for men. Instantly, a million questions and ideas come into your head. You're like, well, who were those elves, and who were those dwarves, and who were those men? Why would they take the rings? What was going on in their kingdoms? What were they tempted by? What did the rings do? How did it help them? How did it hurt them? Like it just births a million stories in your head. It just every time you learn anything about Tolkien, it makes you want to dig deeper, and then you learn more and you dig deeper after that. And so we reckon if you could take those 5 minutes and turn them into 5 seasons of story, that would be a story worth telling.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know. Here's the thing. When I watched Lord of the Rings for the first time, when I first watched Lord of the Rings, I thought, I want to do film. Like, I want to make movies. Like, it inspired me so hard that I was like, I want to do that because that's awesome. That makes me feel something, right? And I've had that feeling every time I turn on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I have that same feeling. When I read the books, I actually read the books after I watched the Jackson trilogy, and I would have to say that I like the books better, but it doesn't change the Jackson trilogy for me. I still have those very good feelings. And here's the thing about cinema. When you're telling stories, people will remember how it makes them feel more than they remember like what they were told, like exactly what a character said or what the message of the film was. People remember how it made them feel. Did it make them feel sad? Did it make them feel victorious? Did it make them feel inspired, right? And people remember that when they watch a movie or a show, they want to have an experience that sticks with them emotionally, and the things, the content, like the communication, isn't necessarily what sticks with you. It's the feelings, right? And I feel as though when everybody watches The Rings of Power, if you like it, you're just kind of like, oh, that's cool. There's some cool looking orcs. They're shooting arrows and stuff, and we're in Middle Earth again. That's what I think people who like the show probably think, but they don't feel anything. This show's not making you feel anything. For the people who don't like the show, because they're fans of the books, it makes them feel angry. It makes them feel defensive, and it makes them feel rightly justified. It makes them feel disrespected because they were looking forward to the idea of more Lord of the Rings, more Middle Earth stories coming to cinema and having those same emotional experiences that they can rally behind and truly love for the next generation. And this show is not delivering at all. There's nothing about this show that makes you feel anything. For me, only frustration. Sometimes laughter. And by laughter, it means like I'm just blown away by the decisions they've made in this show. And so, no, I don't think that there's any kind of competition between this show, because one is built with heart and built with scrappiness, right? The first time, no one believed that the books could be adapted to cinema. No one believed that. And they did it, and it worked, and people loved it, and fans adore it. 20 years after it's been released. And this show is like, as soon as, I don't know if they're going to cancel it before 5 seasons or they're going to make it all the way to 5 seasons. It doesn't matter how far they make it. As soon as it is finished, it will be forgotten, and it'll be a fart in the wind. Like, no one's going to remember this show. It's going to be a ton of money dumped into something that doesn't have a foundation to last through the decades, to go to the next generation. The Jackson trilogy will continue on without a doubt, and with ease. It will continue on. This show will not. It just won't, because there's nothing about it that has heart. There's nothing about it that makes you feel anything. It's all just kind of dull. There's some interesting action moments. There's some interesting visuals. But at the end of the day, like, everything about it's just empty. And if you want to talk about, as I said earlier, when he was saying valid criticisms, I would say start making the show caring about what Tolkien cared about. It's what Peter Jackson said. He said, we're not interested in presenting our own ideas and our own modern day, beliefs and messages into the films. We want to do a story about what Tolkien cared about, right? Both J.R.R. Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien, his son. But they spent so much. Christopher Tolkien spent his entire career building out the legendarium of his father. And I think that's important, to care about what the original creators cared about and approach it in that manner. And I think if you did it in that way and you had some skilled storytellers behind it, it would come across as truly an experience that's worth remembering. But this current thing that's going on, season 1 and 2, is not it. It's not it at all. And I would say a valid criticism is like, in the season 3, goodness, freaking make the story feel bigger. Stop making it feel like a stage play every time we zoom in on a scene. Make these characters actually have some heart. As quickly as you can, realign with the books and stop this nonsense that we've seen in season 1 and season 2. And stop pointing back to the movies. Point back to the books, man. Like, point to the books and stop trying to get like a one-up on the Jackson trilogy, because that's supposed to be way down the road. Stop doing these callbacks because we don't care about that. You're not going to be tied into the very successful movies. You have to be successful by yourself. And if you can't pull it off, then you're done. And that's what I would say. It like a valid criticism is take it way more seriously than it's being taken right now because a ton of money is being dumped into this show. And it's very frustrating to see 2 full seasons of complete garbage. Like there's nothing about it that is engaging or interesting. Anything that even remotely starts to scratch the edge of interesting is completely muffled by the amount of garbage and sludge we had to walk through to get here. Like, actually make this fun. Make it an emotional experience. Get us to care about these characters because almost every episode in season 1 and season 2, I'm struggling not to fall asleep. I'm just bored because this is not fun. I'm not having a good time. And that's what this whole thing's supposed to be about. Having a good time, and it's not fun. It's not fun. So that's all I have to say. That's all I have to say about that. That's what I would say. Now, I am going to go on to some more news around the Acolyte. Yes, the Acolyte's back. The Acolyte's back, and there's one reason why. It's because everybody who just wanted the Acolyte to get a season 2 is just keeping it alive and complaining about the fact that it was canceled. And so I don't want to keep revisiting the Acolyte, but sometimes the actors just pop up and say something, and I'm like, I can't ignore this. It's lighting a fire under my butt, man. And I feel like I want to add my voice to set the record straight. So, here's a question I have for you. Was the Acolyte bad? Do you feel like the Acolyte was a bad show? A bad Star Wars show? I guess you're a racist. That's not a new narrative. We've heard that time and time and time again, and they refuse to stop pushing this narrative that if you think the Acolyte was bad, then you're racist. If you're okay with the show being canceled, then you're racist. And in fact, one of the actors of the Acolyte, Jodie Turner-Smith, who played Mother Anastasia, is saying that Disney is enabling the racism. All right. So she decided to this week clap back, I guess, at Disney specifically. And she had some things to say about the racism that Amanda Stanberg has received online. And first off, I'm just going to say there's not racism here. There might be a couple, but the criticism of the show had nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with bringing a Black person into a Star Wars show because Star Wars has never been a white person show. There has been Lando Calrissian. That was a big deal when the originals came out to include a character like that. And then you had Mace Windu. Is that correct? Yeah, Mace Windu. And a bunch of other characters that are like side characters or small characters in the prequels. And so I don't understand why it's like so necessary to push the idea of racism, but let's hear what she had to say. All right. This is a quote. I've never worked with anybody who's handed me an essay on their character, Turner-Smith said. She's referring to Amanda Stanberg. She put so much care and thought and love into that, and it's disappointing to feel like your studio is not having your back in a very public-facing way. Jodie Turner said Disney has got to stop doing this thing where they don't say anything. When their cast and crew face online bullying significantly, specifically racism, it's just not fair to say anything, to not say anything, she said. It's really unfair. So basically, in my opinion, and this is my view of all of the reviews I saw on the Acolyte, and I've seen tons of people, especially people like Star Wars Theory, who's been almost received the most criticism for the fact that he didn't like the show. This is the narrative. Nobody was hating on Amanda Stenberg, and no one was being racist. No serious people in the fan base were being racist against Amanda Stenberg. All right. At any point. Now, she did receive bullying online after she decided to release a diss track about people being racist because they're not vibing with the show. Then she went on The View and called people who don't like the show, who are critical of the show, racist. And then at the end of the show, when it got canceled, she put out a video on her Instagram. You remember the one where she was like fixing her hair the whole time, where she was like saying thank you to all the people. And then she decided to call the fan base alt-right for getting the show canceled. Look, it is not entirely Amanda Stenberg's fault at all that the show got canceled. Now, she was the lead character who played two different characters. And I do think Amanda Stenberg is not a good actor. Like, she's just not. That has nothing to do with her race. I actually think Jodie Turner-Smith is probably a decent actor. I didn't like her character at all in The Acolyte, at all. But I think she actually has the ability to act on screen. Amanda Stenberg does not. She is not a good actor. She doesn't emote her face. I'm not convinced of the feelings that she has, and I'm not convinced of the dialogue that's coming out of her mouth. Everything falls flat. So there's that criticism. If you want to call that bullying, I would say it's harsh criticism, but it's not bullying. I'm not like saying you shouldn't be in Hollywood. You're not a good actor. Maybe take some acting lessons. I think you got thrown into a Star Wars project before you were ready because you're not that good. You got some improvements that need to be made. Nothing to do with your race. Sorry, I do not have anything against you for your race. I do think it was really upsetting and weird for you to put out a diss track on the fans and to go on The View and to call everyone racist and alt-right, because that's a bad look. And I feel like you're just in an echo chamber of people that's telling you to do this. And it's such a bad idea. Let's see what else she had to say. It would just be nice if the people that have all the money were showing their support and putting their feet down, saying, this is unacceptable. You're not a fan if you do this. Make a really big statement and just see if any money leaves. I bet it won't, because people of color, especially Black people, make up a very large percentage of buying power. They might find that it's actually more lucrative for them, but everyone's using woke like it's a dirty word. Now, there's a lot of thoughts I have to say about this. Putting your feet down and saying this is unacceptable. Disney did the right thing by keeping their mouth shut and not attacking fans about The Acolyte. They have attacked fans in the past, especially around Marvel stuff, and I think other Star Wars stuff, and they didn't do that with The Acolyte. And this is partially why. Because they knew it was bad. Because they saw the criticism and they agreed with it. They were like, how much money did we spend on this? Who created this? Leslie Headland? What? Who made this decision? They looked down the long executive table, at Kathleen Kennedy, and she's like, but the Force is female. Yeah. No, they didn't say anything, not because they thought it was racism, because they listened to people like Star Wars Theory. They watched his videos and said, I agree with this guy. It's not good. And it cost way too much for the crap that we ended up getting. And then if they were to say you're not a fan if you do this, sure, that's a statement. You're not a fan if you're being racist. Here's the problem. You're gaslighting us and telling us that you received a bunch of racism. Not on the internet, not in the spaces that I hang out in, not in everything I've consumed. Maybe there were some YouTube comments, maybe there were some Instagram comments that were a bit racist, but the criticism of the show was because the show was so horribly done. if the actors didn't get involved, all of that criticism would be put on the white lady, former assistant to Harvey Weinstein, Leslie Headland, because her and Kathleen Kennedy are the ones that made this show happen. So all of that criticism would have been put on them. But instead, they decided to join hands and be like, no, we're gonna gaslight everybody and say this is just racist. That's a big mistake. She's saying it's a big mistake to keep your mouth shut as a studio. I would say it would be a big mistake for them to say anything at all, because they already know they're in hot water. And let's not forget, Bob Iger said a year ago, that they were pivoting. This show was already being made. It might have already been done. The money was probably already spent. So this is probably not a part of their new future plans at Disney to be super woke with the stuff, because they're like, hey, remember that whole Nelson Peltz thing where he was trying to get on the board and was almost going to, take executive power in some capacity over the decision-making at Disney? That was a close call. That was a close call, because they've been just bleeding out money and not earning it back. And they have seen that there's like 2 Star Wars things that people like, maybe 3. You got a lot of love for Rogue One. Not a big fan, but not the worst thing that Disney's made. Andor was great. Mandalorian season 1 and 2 were pretty darn good. That's like the only thing Disney Star Wars has that was enjoyed by the fans. Because Kenobi sucked. The sequel trilogy sucked. Mandalorian season 3 sucked. What else have they done? Solo wasn't great. I feel like I'm missing a couple. There's been a lot of losses. The majority of money that's been spent on Disney Star Wars has been not enjoyed. And so there's this narrative of racism and bigotry is so tired. And the fact that like actors keep showing up and even talking about it is it's a bad look. It really is. So Turner Smith expressed hope that things will change, saying opinions change, and she believes the world will someday get to a point where people will stop caring about people of color being in franchises created by white people. Again, this is like a complete misconception of the criticism here. This is a gaslighting thing. It's like a never-ending cycle. It's like hire a bunch of people who are super woke activists who don't know how to tell a story. Tell a really bad story. Dump a ton of money into it. Put it out to the public. Receive criticism because they weren't entertained. They didn't like the crap story that was created. Gaslight the fans, say that they are racist. Move on. Give those same woke activists the rights and the ability to write another crap story, and the cycle just keeps going. It's like after every single show that's been put out by Disney recently, it's like there's this constant gaslighting of telling the fans that they're racist or bigots in some capacity because they didn't like the story. They didn't like the show. They didn't think the characters were good. It's not about the color of their skin. I don't care how many times they repeat it. The internet's going to respond by saying, you're wrong, you're crazy, you're living in an echo chamber. It's not about the race. Get someone who can write. Get Amanda Stenberg some acting lessons. Include Jodie Turner-Smith in it. Cast her again. Tell a really good story. Try to do it on a lower budget than you got for this, because sometimes struggle makes a better product. If you're given the world before you've earned it, you tend to not know how to handle it, right? So give them a skeleton crew, literally, and have them try to create something amazing with not like every resource available to them. They might come up with something better. Change out the writers, change out the creators, and you might be surprised what you come up with. And the fans will actually like it if those steps are followed. If the lore is respected, if it feels like it works linearly, if it feels like it's respecting and setting up the Skywalker series in a respectful manner, if it feels like it's not just this women empowerment like priority of the story, it's not so much about women empowerment that can't be in the show. It's about the whole show was about women empowerment. It was like that was the whole thing. It's like from the originals, Princess Leia, like she is the princess. She is a main character in the original Star Wars that were made in the 60s and 70s. Like there has been women empowerment in the show from its conception. Remember that one scene where they needed to cross the hallway and there's lasers flying and she grabs the gun and she just, covers herself and crosses the hallway and doesn't get shot and fires back at the stormtroopers, and she shoots a hole in the garbage disposal and they jump in and she saves their butts. There's been women taking charge and being badasses from the original movie, the first one. So why are we acting like this is a show created by white people, like for white people? That's never been the case. And we have to like make up for something. Like there are things in the world to make up for when it comes to diversity. The Star Wars is not one of them. Absolutely not. So this is just such a false, fake, tired narrative that keeps being repeated about the Acolyte and anything that's diverse. It's starting to make me think they just cast diverse people so that when the show receives criticism, they have a blanket to say, it's not us, it's racist culture. It's not that we don't know how to tell a story. It's the racism in culture. It's not that, I don't know, we completely dropped the ball and wasted $300 million of Disney's money on a show that had 8 episodes that were only 25 minutes long a piece. It's not that like we wasted the equivalent of an entire city's housing rent on a piece of garbage. It's that culture's so incredibly racist. Like they're over here in the corner, just like holding their knees, just swaying, being like, you won't even believe how racist this world is. And it's like, no, stop gaslighting yourself. You guys just dropped the ball. You made a crap show on way too much money, and people are upset about it. And it's not Jodie Turner-Smith's fault. She's an actor, and she's not a bad actor. But it's a problem if she's going to continue this narrative that it's the fans' fault when it's a false accusation. It's just false. I always get worked up on these things. I always get worked up, man. That's all I have to say about that. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me for the live. Thanks so much for being here, whether you're a fan of the Rings of Power or you're not, or whether you are a fan of the Acolyte or you're not. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below, so please leave them there. Like this video so that more people will see it. I really appreciate your dedication to the time. I hope this is entertaining. I have lost my voice a little bit. I always get worked up and my voice starts to go hoarse on these solo lives because I'm just going and going and going and going. But really appreciate it. You're the best. I'll see you next time. Stay safe.